Hello, everyone. My name is Michael. As was already said, I am a student at Penn State. And today I'm going to be talking about making animated maps in Adobe Animate. So the first question is, why animate a map? So for this talk, I'm going to be walking through making an animated map of Amtrak's long-distance routes and highlighting stations that are only served by trains overnight. So in this case, I define that as between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. And with this specific case, I thought it was useful to animate the map to show the temporal elements, so like as time goes on, where are stations that are in at least one direction, only seeing trains at night. And the second question is, why use Adobe Animate? I'm not here to sell you Adobe Animate, but I liked Adobe Animate because it's already within Adobe's ecosystem, and I use Adobe Illustrator a lot. And so it's very easy, as I'll walk through, to bring in maps that you've made in Adobe Illustrator into Adobe Animate and kind of go from there. So I'm going to walk through a couple animation basics, very, very basic and only a couple concepts. First, what is an animation? I like to think of it as just a series of images that are shown sequentially in sort of a fast order. And within that, there are two key terms that are important to keep in mind. And these might be Adobe Animate specific, but I haven't really had a lot of experience with other animation software, so you might come across this elsewhere. I know for a fact keyframes are not. So the first is keyframes, and I like to think of these as checkpoints for your animation. So you might have an object that is moving from the top left corner of your canvas to the top right corner, and then it goes down to the bottom right corner. And as it goes through each of those corners, you create a checkpoint in at each location. And as you play your animation, you will see that the object will change positions at each keyframe. But if you just play it, you're going to see the object move one position, and then it's going to immediately jump to the next position. So how do we fix that without animating a million frames in between each one? Because that would be a pain. We introduce a classic tween. So in Adobe Animate, you can create a classic tween, and this fills in the motion between two keyframes. And so it makes it a lot easier to do kind of longer animations where you're not maybe as concerned with each individual frame's, the object's position in each individual frame. You don't have to meticulously micromanage it. So getting started, let's get ready to animate. We're not quite at the animation phase yet, but we're going to get there. So the first that I'm going to spend almost no time on is getting the data, because there's a lot of research on the internet, and it would be kind of its own topic of how I got this data and pulled it into ArcGIS Pro, which is kind of where I started. I got the Amtrak routes from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, which is part of the Department of Transportation. And then I got Amtrak stations. You can also get the Amtrak stations from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. But I got the Amtrak stations from Amtrak's GTFS file, which is what they give Google Maps and Apple Maps and other mapping software to show map users when their trains are running and where they're running. And from there, I can kind of filter out all of the stations that are not used on Amtrak's long-distance network. So next is making the base map. So I brought this into Illustrator, and I made a base map showing the continental US, which is where Amtrak's whole network is, and then all of the routes and stations. And then I made some of this is sort of arbitrary in a way, but I made all of the hubs a little bit bigger. So like there's kind of hubs in Boston, New York, not Philly, DC, Savannah, Georgia is a terminus, and a couple other places on the West Coast. Seattle is a hub on this map. The bottom left corner is the clock. This is going to be important for creating our animation later. Up in this top right corner is the train icon, and this is what will travel along the network to show you where the train is throughout your animation. And then most importantly, this is the easiest thing to do in Illustrator as opposed to Adobe Animate. I have all of my layers nicely organized on the right-hand side of the screen. So I have the clock and the icon, a couple other things, and I have each route on its own layer. And I'll kind of show why that's important later, but it's important that if you are using kind of a route model like Amtrak's network, it's important that you have all of your routes on their own layer, because you'll turn each layer into like a motion guide later. So importing into Adobe Animate. This is pretty easy. You open Animate, you make a new project, and then you go to File, Import, and then Import to Stage, and then this will bring up this window. you can import all of your layers from your Illustrator file at once. And so you can do that if you want, or you can check specific layers that you just want to import, depending on how you want to do that. And then you have this. And I'm going to use the folder icon down here to make a nice little organized layer situation. So I have the clock on its own layer, the icon, the train icon on its own layer, and then I have a base map folder which will remain pretty much unaltered throughout the rest of the project, which has the stations, the routes, the states, and the background, which is like that purplish thing, purplish rectangle in the background. So making the train symbol and making the train icon into a symbol. So once you've imported your Illustrator file into Adobe Animate, you're going to find your train icon, and you're going to right-click on it, and you're going to click Convert to Symbol, and you'll be greeted with this window. And there's one important thing with this. You want to make sure that you turn this into a graphic under this type. So it'll default to being a movie clip, but you can only apply the aforementioned classic tweens to graphic types, graphic symbols. So you're going to click OK. We're going to do a quick thing here, which is filling in the frames. This is how we're going to set the duration of our animation. And so I've decided to, because it's between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., I've added a 2-hour buffer on each side, so it really goes from 5 p.m. to 10 a.m. or through the 9 o'clock hour. And so I'm going to make the animation be a full 16 seconds long. And so I'm going to click and drag from the first frame all the way out to right up to the 17-second marker. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to click Insert Frame. And this will fill in all of your frames at once, and you won't have to do it. You have it done. You don't have to worry about it later. And you can do this for all layers at once. You can just click and drag kind of in a rectangle. And it works nicely. Setting the motion guides, this is why I mentioned that making each of your routes into a layer was important. So you're going to make a copy of all of your routes from your base map layer and then bring them into maybe their own motion guides folder. And you're going to select all of them at once, and you're going to right-click and click Guide. And it will turn all of them into a motion guide, and you will know that you've turned them into a motion guide because instead of being a Post-it note type icon next to the layer name, you'll have this pickaxe. And it'll look great. So now let's actually animate. We've done all the prereq work. We're ready to animate now. The first and easiest part of this is doing the clock. There are a lot of different ways to do this, but for simplicity's sake, I chose to go about it this way. So because I mentioned that the animation is going to be a full 16 seconds long, each second is 1 hour, and the frame rate for my animation is 30 frames per second. So I'm going to, this animated GIF here is showing, I'm going to go out 30 frames from frame 1 to frame 31. I'm going to create a new keyframe by clicking one of the buttons kind of right above the timeline with the empty circle in the middle. And I'm going to change the text from saying 5 o'clock to saying 6 o'clock. And I'm going to do that for every single hour. It's a little tedious, but for this project, it's fine. It works. Train route animation. This is maybe a more involved process than the clock animation. There's a couple more steps here. So for this presentation, I'm going to be walking through animating the City of New Orleans train, which runs from Chicago to New Orleans. It's in the name. And I'm going to make a new layer underneath the City of New Orleans motion guide. And I'm going to name it something that will make me remember which train this is. And so you're going to make a new layer for each train icon on your project. So for this, I'm going to have a new layer that goes, it's the train icon that travels towards New Orleans. Hence, it says NOLA in it. And you can see here it's underneath the motion guide, but it's not really underneath the motion guide. You want to make sure that it's indented, and you'll know that you've done it properly because this icon will change from it'll change from a pickaxe to whatever you want to call that. I haven't come up with a name for it. I'm not that creative. So then you're going to, with that layer selected, you're going to drag the train icon onto the layer, and you're going to make sure that it snaps to your motion guide. So it's helpful to have, in this case, I don't, but it might be helpful to have all of your other motion guides turned off so that you can kind of make sure you're snapping it to the right one. And then you're going to go to the end of your animation, and you're going to hit a new keyframe and set the last position for where you want your train to end up at the very end of the animation. So in here, it said at New Orleans. This was a mistake. It should end just before Jackson, Mississippi. Apologize for anyone who's really offended by that error. And you're going to make sure that you set a new keyframe, and then you're going to click right before that keyframe and click Create Classic Tween. And this will make it so that your train travels along the motion path from Chicago to New Orleans or wherever you have on your project. But one thing that could happen, what if it doesn't work? What if the train just travels from Chicago to New Orleans in a straight line, not following the path? The solution that I came up with is to add more keyframes. And this is helpful for two reasons. Number one, it'll help you snap your train icon onto the path, and it will also, because this is following a schedule, adding more keyframes can help you match the train icon to the correct pace. Trains are not linear, do not travel at the same speed throughout their entire route, so it can be helpful for that. So this is the animation so far, after I've done some adjustments. So it's traveling from Chicago all the way down through Illinois and so on, and it'll keep going. The second step of this is adding a station glow, because I want to show stations that are served by trains only overnight in at least one direction. So what you're going to do is you're going to copy and paste one of your station icons, and you're going to convert that to a symbol, and you're going to name it something. I named it Station Glow, and it'll show up in your library, and you're going to double click on it, and you'll get greeted with this window, and this is where you can change the appearance of your symbol. And this is helpful because you can, if you change your appearance here, it'll change all of the other instances of this symbol throughout your project. So I'm going to change it to, it doesn't really show up very well on the projector, but it's a light yellow on a white background, so it's hard to see. But you're going to drag it in, you're going to drag it over top the station that you want to show glowing. And then I did some work here to make sure that it shows up when the train runs over it. And I inserted some keyframes and inserted a classic tween so that, I jumped ahead, I'm sorry. So you're going to go over to color effects, and you're going to make sure that in the first 10 frames of the animation, before your second keyframe, you're going to set it the alpha to 0 so that it doesn't show up. And then I'm going to add the classic tween, and this will make it so that as the train goes over, it'll fade in. And this is the final Chicago to New Orleans train animation. So you can see the trains are going. I added the one in the other direction, and as they go, the stations glow, show up a little bit, and then they change to an orange. They change to an orange if two trains, if the station is served by by train overnight in both directions. So no interactive features. When I was assembling this presentation, I realized that there was a lot of information to cover, and that some of the interactive features are very useful, but would be a bit too expansive. And so when I was constructing this presentation, I decided that would maybe be best to have as its own presentation after having this as kind of like an introduction. So I just wanted to address that and make sure that people didn't think I just forgot about that, because I did not forget about it. I spent a lot of time thinking about the interactive features in Adobe Animate. And that is all I have. Thank you.
From Michael, everybody. All right, we have time for one or two questions. Lily will hand the mic over to anyone who's got one, so raise your hand if you got a question.
Right here. Okay, that was a lot of information in one talk, which is really impressive. How long does something like this typically take you, like from start to finish?
Really depends. Depends on how easy. A lot of this was getting the data right, because there was a lot of filtering I had to do to get only the long distance stations. And then per station route, it took maybe 10 minutes. Once I got into a rhythm, it took maybe 10 minutes to do the train icon animation, and then I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 minutes to do the station glows for a particular route. It just depends on how cooperative the motion guides are, and if I have to add a bunch of keyframes to keep it on a path. So once you get it, once you've done it a couple of times and get into a rhythm, it really, as with all things, it just gets a lot faster.
Hi, thanks so much for the presentation. I was wondering if you could talk about why you use Adobe Animate instead of After Effects, if there's like a benefit to animate over After Effects, or if it's just like personal choice, or just anything you could say about that.
So the original catalyst for this was also having interactive features, and my understanding of After Effects was that you can't have the HTML elements in it, and so like this animation you could absolutely do in After Effects with no interactive features, but were you to add things like pop-ups and stuff, you would have to do that in Animate. And I did a lot of animation in high school, and so like this kind of thinking about animating worked better. Animate works better for my brain than After Effects in a lot of cases as well. So part of it's personal preference, part of it's features.